What's up, folks? This is Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards, and today I am here to talk about Hyperborea 3rd Edition. This is the game formerly known as Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea from Northwind Adventures, produced by Jeffrey Talanian. So I'm going to give my thoughts. I'm going to talk about what it is and why you should be playing it. So without further ado, let's get into it.
But what is best in life? The open steppe, free thoughts, falcons at your wrist, and wind in your hair. Wrong! Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of your women. That is good. That is good.
All right, so as I mentioned in my intro, this game is by Jeffrey Talanian of Northwind Adventures. He is particularly of interest to those that are longtime gamers, as he was one of the closest workers with Gary Gygax on Gary's last big project, being Castle Zijaj for the Castles and Crusades game. Jeffrey Talanian worked with him extensively on that and actually had a large portion of the project done that has never been able to be released because of disputes with the family of Mr. Gygax. So he definitely has a Gygaxian feel to everything he does, with good reason, because he worked a lot and very closely with Gary. So Hyperborea is very rooted in the Appendix in feel of all of the best of Gygaxian works. So specifically, Mr. Talanian cites frequently Howard Lovecraft Smith and Burroughs for his inspirations. And as you can see from the cover of this player's manual, this is the new 3rd edition player's manual. You've got a barbarian, you've got a fighter, and you've got a wizard fighting a big mutated spider creature while standing on what looks like bits of a spaceship. So this is weird fantasy. It does have kind of the Cthulhu mythos influence in the creatures that you're going to fight and some of the gods that you're going to see. It also has some of that Atlantean lost technology feel to it, with spaceships and laser pistols being infrequently spread about the world, so they're still weird and special, but you can plan on seeing those at some point in your campaigns. Now, Hyperborea is not just a game, but it's also a campaign setting. So the world of Hyperborea has a distinct Conan and Cthulhu feel to it, with elements of both. There's very minimal attempts to hide this throughout the work. Instead of having Sumerian barbarians, you'll have Cimmerian barbarians with a K. And the cultists that follow Cthulhu in this world, they spell their Cthulhu with a K. But other than that, it's very easy to see where his inspirations come from, especially in the write-ups for the many, many classes that you will find in the game. So the main thing you probably are wondering is, how does it play? Well, Hyperborea is a OSR retro clone that is closely trying to emulate a refined vision of AD&D. So there have been some quality of life improvements that have been made. So mechanically, there is a unified saving roll that is then adjusted by the special saving rolls that certain classes are good at. There's also a fighting ability, which is also known as the base attack bonus in other systems, instead of a THAC0. There are simplified resolutions of different actions, like the thief rolls, which use a D12, and there's also a D12 used for turning rolls for clerics. Now, whenever you're doing non-standard actions, such as anything that would revolve around leveraging your attributes, you will use a D6 for those rolls. So it's a very simple system, and it does have a distinct continuity to the types of mechanics that it offers, even though it does use a few different dice in those. It's not strictly a D20 for every resolution. I personally like seeing the D12 to get a little bit more love. So it offers a huge expansion on flavors of options for characters, but not with races. The races in Hyperborea are all human races, and there are no mechanical benefits to them other than those that would come through role playing means. So, that being said, there are 26 different character classes, all fully fleshed out and with a huge amount of variety to them. Pretty much any sort of multi-class option that you could achieve in older editions of D&D, you could probably accomplish through using one of the very detailed classes available in Hyperborea without the use of multi-classes. So, for example, there are the four traditional classes: the fighter, magician, thief, and cleric, and then each one of those has between, I think, 4 and 6 different subclasses. And some of those subclasses can depart quite greatly from the original. For example, the warlock is a subclass of the fighter, being a traditional fighting man with some limited spellcasting abilities, most closely related to the magus if you're familiar with Pathfinder. The barbarians are done with that strict Appendix in feel, and you are going to actually benefit from doing the no armor barbarian, as it gives you an AC bonus and also a bonus to many of your thief skills that you gain. Clearly, the barbarians in this world were of the Conan vein and not the mindless killer vein. So, now that all being said, Hyperborea does use a descending AC. So if Thacos and descending ACs cause you to shrivel up into a ball and cry, this is probably not going to be a good game for you. If you get night sweats just thinking about having to do a little math or look at the bottom of your character sheet to make an attack roll, this may not be your game. But for those of us that are accustomed to that style of play, it's not really a big detriment to the gameplay. Another issue which could be a turnoff for some otherwise very likely fans of this style of work is going to be the Vancian magic. Most swords and sorcery games have some sort of mechanic to make magic a little bit more weird. For example, corruption or mutations, or some sort of a misfired spell table. And admittedly, I would like to see that here, but it's just not something that was focused on. Now, that being said, the other class features of the casters definitely have that appendix in feel to them, and they definitely create the weird feel to their purpose on this world. So if you are dead set on having a weirder magic than what's available in the core rules, I might suggest picking up the Sharp Swords and Sinister Spells rules. You can get those for about $10 for a softback copy, and they have some very easily hackable tables that you could throw into this system and achieve the same result. The other thing that I would like to point out is that as a OSR game that is closely tied to AD&D, this is going to be backwards compatible with very minimal effort, not just to the older editions of Hyperborea, or formerly Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, but it's also going to be very easily compatible to anything that is firmly rooted in the OSR system. What's changed? What's new about this third edition? Why should I get it if I've already got the old edition? Well, there have been several minor class tweaks to each of the classes just to make them a little bit more balanced or a little bit easier to play at the table. But the monk in particular has received the greatest amount of attention, and it was seen to have gotten the best overhaul of all the classes. Also, the book has been split back into 2 volumes. The last edition had opted for a single, nearly 700-page mammoth of a tome, which was actually pretty difficult to wield at the table. So that has been split back up into 2 volumes, as it was in the first edition of Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea. Boy, that's a mouthful. I can see why they changed it just to Hyperborea. Also, the new edition has new art and specifically border art choices that look a lot like some of the DCC pages at the beginning of their volumes for Dungeon Crawl Classics and Mutant Crawl Classics, with the art around the different sections of the book. There's also an extensive index, which was not available in the last edition, which is nice. And there is a separate tome, which is an Atlas of Hyperborea. So that Atlas is going to give you a nice option for zooming in on specific areas of the map that your players are experiencing, and it's going to give you a great way to access those different hex crawls. So there's at least one new adventure, which is the Late Trapper's Lament. That is an excellent weird fantasy adventure that you would be well to pick up. You can get a digital copy for $10. All of the Northwind Adventures adventure modules are great value. They have really interesting artwork, and they always have some sort of a M. Night Shyamalan twist that makes it just a little bit weird. It's not your straight fantasy dungeon crawl. So you'd be well to pick up any of those, but specifically the Late Trapper's Lament. Currently there are 10 total when you include all the ones that were released during second edition. There were a couple of smaller ones for first edition I'm not including in there. Also, the third edition offers a fancy leatherette edition that is signed and numbered, that is, as of the taping of this video, is available on their website for $135, which in my opinion is a steal. If you look at what the older editions of this game are fetching for the regular editions, I think these leatherettes are really going to keep their value and only grow as time goes on. Just to wrap up here, I think that this game has tremendous production values, both from the physical copy and also from the layout, the design, and the artwork. Everything has that 1970s Appendix N feel to it. It's almost like you just picked it off the shelf at your local hobby store or your Walden Books. For those of you that are too young to get that reference, go ask your parents. There's a real nostalgia factor for any of us that enjoyed AD&D. I can't help but think that if Gary would have stayed with TSR and been more involved with the future editions of Dungeons & Dragons, that it would have probably developed into something a lot more like this than the splat book Purgatory that was second edition, or the video game inspired version that was third edition. I think this is going to be great for anybody looking for an improved way to play any of those old AD&D modules, as well as any of the great weird fantasy options that are available from Northwind. So as an aside, anyone that is looking for a cheaper table copy of the game for their players to use, the second edition Player's Manual is readily available at a cheaper price. It's close enough that unless your player is using a monk, this is probably going to be good enough for what they need it for. Very few changes. So I think that if they were wanting a cheap copy, that is a great way to go. I just picked up a couple more from my table and actually got them from Captain Courageous of YouTube Merit. He was selling them on eBay, and I happened to pick them up from him, so appreciate that. So the last thing I would like to say is that as gamers, we should be supporting projects like this. Hyperborea is a love letter to the roots of our game, and Jeff at Northwind Adventures is a wonderful dude. I've had the pleasure of talking to him very briefly through email correspondence, and just a very nice guy and very dedicated to what he does. Between Northwind, Troll Lord Games that do Castles and Crusades, and Goodman Games, I think that our hobby is in great hands for the foreseeable future, and there's always going to be an element of those roots available to those that are looking for it. So this is Hyperborea, 3rd edition by Northwind Games and Jeffrey Talanian. You should pick up your copies at either hyperborea.tv or Drive-Thru RPG. This is an unsponsored video. I get nothing for this other than the satisfaction of knowing that some of you guys may get to enjoy some of this wonderful world and game system. So until next time, this is Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards. Good gaming, and God bless.